Hello and welcome back to my channel, In Search of Wonder. My name is Anne and this is my wrap up for the week, what I've been reading. Not sure if I'll do these weekly or monthly on a regular basis, but my very first book that I finished this week, I just talked about it for a really long time, and I felt like if I did that every book and saved it all for the end of the month, that would be like a whopping super long, not to mention tedious video. So I thought at least this week we'll go for a weekly wrap up and see what happens. So there's just some clips here from each book that I read this week as I finished them and my thoughts on them. So let's get started with my Latin American novel that I read.
Okay, so 3 days into September, and I finished a book that was in my August TBR, and that is Martin Rivas by Alberto Blest Gana. It was for the Tea and Ink Society Challenge, which is not on YouTube, but my sisters and I are doing this. It's a year-long challenge, different prompts for each month of the year for different kinds of classics. The only requirement is that the classic must be written before 1970. Otherwise, anything that fits the prompt goes. So the prompt for August was a classic by a Latin American author, which I had never read. I don't know that I've read anything by a Latin American author, classic or otherwise. So I was excited about this one. A little stumped, but I found this one, Martin Rivas, and I'm glad that I read it. It was very good. Now, the author, he actually had an Irish father, I believe, and a Chilean mother, and he was educated in Europe. So he purposely modeled his novels, according to this afterward, by European novels. And I could see that. It felt like a very familiar reading experience to me. Having read many European, especially British novels, it wasn't that wasn't significantly different from them in big ways. Didn't seem to me. The author definitely had a sense of humor, and there were some places where I laughed out loud and read the little quotes to my family because I thought it was so funny. One was, I'll read this scene. So one, there's a couple where actually a lot of the funny comments are between them. So the wife is always saying, purposely saying things to aggravate her husband about his political views. Like she'll say exactly the opposite of whatever it is he thinks, just to get his goat. And he takes the bait every single time. So in this particular scene, they're at a gathering, and he says, "Ta ta ta," interrupted Don Fidel. "Women don't understand politics. Isn't that so, sir?" he added, turning towards Martin, who is the hero of our story, who is nearest to him. "That is not my opinion, sir," replied Rivas modestly. Don't you love him already? Don Fidel looked at him with surprise. "What?" he exclaimed. Then, as if a sudden idea enlightened him, "Are you a bachelor?" he asked. "Yes, senor." "Ah, that's the reason. We won't say anything more about it." So that was funny. And then there was another one, same couple. So she loves to read European romance novels. And so she is reading one day, and her husband comes into the room and wants to talk to her about some very prosaic business matters. And the paragraph goes like this. Thoughtfully, he entered the room in which his wife passed the greater part of the day reading novels and her favorite poets. At the present moment, she was reading The Dream of Aden and the Devilish World of Esperanzada. Pretty sure I did not pronounce any of that correctly. And she heard the voice of her husband at the moment that the hero was begging Saladin for a horse, just as Richard III begged for one at the price of his kingdom. The presence of Don Fidel tore her from her poetic ecstasy to plunge her into the prose of everyday life. I just really felt that. Ever happened to you? someone comes and tears you from your poetic ecstasy and plunges you into the prose of everyday life. Definitely happens to me. And then one more. So this one is in the this is different set of characters, which I'll explain in a minute. But the father is scolding the young man because he has done something really very bad. And so the young man responds to his dad. "What do you expect, Papa?" said the young man confusedly. "Youth must have its fling." "That's all very well, but let it fling in some other way," replied Don Damaso, with the gravity of a Figaro. So, those were some funny comments. So the story is about Martin Rivas is the eponymous character's name, and he is a provincial guy, young man, and he comes into the city. So automatically we have this contrast between country life and city life that is set up a little bit in the story. And he comes to live with a family. So you have this contrast within this household of this young, impoverished young man who's from the country, doesn't have the city airs, not upper class, but he's living with a family that has risen to the highest ranks of Santiago culture. And it's all about how he makes his way. The central storyline is how Martin falls in love with the daughter of the house, whose name is Leonor. And it's kind of a little bit of insta love there, which I know annoys some people, but it's not really. It is for him, but it's not at all for her, because she actually is very proud and haughty. She's a beautiful young lady, and she's been spoiled and petted her whole life. She kind of runs her household. Her mom, her dad, her brother, they all do whatever she wants. Very spoiled in that sense. And so she looks down on him as being beneath her touch, and she wants nothing to do with him initially. But then, because he doesn't respond to her like her typical fawning admirers, only because even though he loves her, he feels very inferior to her. So he does not let on, and he doesn't in any way try to engage with her as her equal. And so she's intrigued by this. And so really in this story, she's the only character that actually has like a development arc throughout the book. Martin is a very steadfast person. He doesn't change much who he is at the beginning of the story, other than gaining a little bit of polish as a result of living with the upper class for a while and studying in university. He doesn't really change in his essence very much. He's just a steadfast character. He has a great deal of common sense. In fact, he's probably the only character in the book, except for maybe one other girl, who has any common sense. And so they all look to him for advice. Like they're all panicking about, whatever's happening. And then Martin is like, "Well, why don't you just XYZ?" And they're like, "Oh, why didn't I think of that? Wow, Martin, you're so smart." And it's like, you couldn't figure that out? Like that was easy. Okay. But anyways, so Martin is like their common sense for them. He's just a very steadfast, dependable kind of guy. And so Leonor throughout the story begins to admire him more and more, and as she admires him more and more, she goes through this struggle of kind of losing her haughtiness and the haughty aspect to her interaction with other people. And then there's a climactic moment that really humbles her, and she emerges from that like still a very strong and courageous person. So her personality doesn't change. She's still, kind of, like one of those more commanding kind of personalities, but she's humbled, and she's able to love Martin more fully and sacrificially than she ever would have been before as a result of this situation that she goes through. So her character development is really the only true character development in the story. There's a little bit in some of the other characters, but really, she's the one who changes the most, and her love for Martin is what changes her. The primary theme of this story is about how power and money affect relationships. Not just like who marries whom, that's part of it. That's a part of any like book about class or whatever, but it's it's also about how they love each other and how well they love each other. So you have people, there's a poor family that's kind of set up as kind of the antagonists of the story, and then you have the wealthy families, and um then you have Martin kind of in the middle, who is poor, but he has the benefit of, being ensconced in this wealthy family. And then you have his buddy who was wealthy, but has lost some of his money for whatever reason. So you have all of these different strata of people, and how their position influences what they are able to bring to a relationship and how that affects how the relationship plays out. For example, there's a secondary couple in this story, and spoiler alert, their relationship ends up not working out. But at one point in this story, the father of the girl in the couple consents to their marriage only because the guy in the couple, his uncle, owns the farm that the girl's father is leasing. Did you track all that? And the lease is up. And so the guy in the couple is able to convince his uncle to insist that in order for the father-in-law to continue his lease on the farm, he must allow the couple to get married. And into that plays like political relationships. So it's total power play going on, and also leveraging money to get what they want. The couple loves each other, and they want to get married, but they would never get married they would not be able to marry without this little bit of, political maneuvering and the issue of the money and everything. So, and then there's the antagonist family, the poor family. The mother especially, and her son, really, they're kind of like the Thénardier family in Les Miserables, in that they are just out to get whatever they can get, and they feel entitled because they're poor. They feel like all of the rich people just owe them automatically because they're rich, and they need to help this family, the Molina family, because they're poor. So they're willing to blackmail anybody or trap people, however they can get their hands on Willa. They're willing to do that. So gamble, cheat at cards, whatever. They're just out to get money in whatever way they can get their grubby little hands on it, aside from actual honest labor. So their daughters, well, the daughters of the family, the girls, they have the most tragic story in the whole family, because just the way it ends up. I won't go into more details because I've already talked too long, but they just cannot rise above their situation of poverty because of, first of all, because of the lack of character of their mother and brother, but also because, the men of quality, so to speak, won't look twice at them because of their political, not their political situation, but their social status, their class, even though they're more than happy to attend the parties at their house, because, the liquor flows freely, and they have, they dance all these Latin dances, which was kind of cool to read about. And it's like, raucous parties that the rich young men are more than happy to join in and have fun and flirt with the girls. But as far as actually marrying them or falling in love with them or giving their heart to them, not going to happen. So, and there's a lot in the story about how these girls, they really have no recourse to rise above that. And in the end, the one daughter ends up essentially sacrificing herself in marriage. Again, there's a certain leverage of power there that happens in order to save the life of Martin Rivas, whom she actually is in love with. So, to wrap up my thoughts about it, as the more I think about it, the more I feel like the main idea that I'm coming away with is actually really quite profound, in the way that the story is told. Is that yes, class and power, money, they influence who you fall in love with and are able to marry and the relationships that you have. But ultimately, what makes the biggest difference is character. That character can overcome these difficulties. But if you don't have character, then you will not be able to overcome these difficulties. And that is contrasted in at least 3, maybe 4 different relationships that are happening throughout the story. The main one being Martin and Leonore, who are able to overcome their class difference and their financial status differences because they both have strong character. In particular, Martin, who's, who is written as having like exemplary character, so that they all admire for his character. So, and he influences Leonore, who already was a strong person in her own right, but flawed. So she grows throughout the story. And so with the two of them, with their strong character, they are able to overcome the differences of class and social status and wealth, and able to forge a relationship. There's another couple that's more or less reasonably well matched in all of those areas, but because of moral failing on the part of the man in the story, their relationship completely falls apart. And their stories end on a sad or serious note, not exactly the joyful fulfillment that you have with Martin and Leonore. And then finally, you have the poor girls and their struggles to have meaningful, lasting relationships that are hindered not so much by their level of poverty, although that plays into it, but by the poor character of their mother and brother, who basically run their lives and they can't get out from under that. So the poor character of their family affects them negatively, and they're unable to rise above their situation of poverty to better themselves in life with meaningful relationships. So that was Martin Rivas, and I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4.5 stars. Knocked off just a little bit because the narration was interesting. It was third person, but like it would say, such and such happened, and then this character said this. And then the narrator will step in and say, instead of just continuing the story, will insert themselves in there and say, well, in order for you to understand why this happened, we have to go over to this person's house on the day before and find out, let's go over there and see what happened over there. So it's just, it happens a lot, and it makes it a little bit choppy. I mean, I'm not sure if it was like an intentional device or just part of the whole process of, development of a novel, or if it's just my personal, I don't know, made it a little bit choppy and a little bit less enjoyable as a narrative, made it less seamless of a story, but otherwise very much enjoyed it. And that is enough about that one. So that was Martin Rivas. I recommend.
Okay, so this is the second book I've read in September that I finished. Started it in August. Dear Henry, Love Edith. Sorry, I'm getting a glare here. By Becca Kinzer, which is a debut novel by the author. A contemporary rom-com. I enjoyed. It was fun. I loved the thread running through of the nod to classic movies and rom-coms are everybody's favorites, like You've Got Mail and While You Were Sleeping. Definitely caught some scenes that were inspired by those movies and some aspects of the plot inspired by them. So that was fun. Enjoyed that. There was some faith elements in there, not super strong, but There was some faith elements there to the story, and the main character has some development that she needs to go through as far as determining what she really wants out of life, and she wants to have adventure, she wants her life to mean something, but she has to come to learn that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go out and do something big and noteworthy or adventurous, but that building a family with someone is meaningful and adventurous, which anyone who has embarked on that endeavor certainly agree. So I think that was I really liked that. Overall, I really enjoyed it. I haven't left my review on Goodreads yet, but I feel like it's probably 3.5 to 4 stars. So that means I liked it. I think it was a good book. Probably won't pick it up again to reread, but I enjoyed it. And if you like romantic rom-coms, then contemporary romances, then you will probably enjoy this one. I had only 2 little complaints about it. One, I felt like some of the humor was maybe a little forced, but maybe I wasn't really in the mood for it. I don't know, that was just one thing. And I mean, some things were definitely, I laughed out loud. There was some funny moments, and overall the humor was well done, but there was sometimes I could tell, like, you know, okay, this is supposed to be funny, but I'm not laughing, so maybe I just have a bad sense of humor. So there's that. The other thing was the main character's love interest, Henry. I found him lacking most of the way through the book, but I struggle with that because I kind of have a principle that I don't automatically dislike a book or mark a book down because I dislike one of the characters, because characters are kind of like people in real life, right? There's things about people that you like and don't like, but that doesn't mean they're not valuable people who have things to teach you and things you can learn from. And also, very often the things that you dislike about someone are, you dislike them because it's actually part of you, you know, it's something that you identify with perhaps, or you understand too well because you are like that, maybe. So I kind of, on principle, don't automatically discount a book because I just like some aspect of one of the characters. But I did think that Henry was kind of, I don't know, like weak. Maybe that's hard to, it's a really harsh word, but I feel like he could have just been a little more proactive about his life rather than just letting it happen to him. Like, you know, his secretary had to give him a kick in the pants and a push and a shove to do what was necessary to do so that he didn't run the family business into the ground, which I guess is kind of a spoiler, so sorry about that. But he did improve as the story went on, and I think he learned some important things about that, but it wasn't like really, well, I guess that was part of the story, so part of his development. So in the end, I can't really say I just like the book because of that, but I did notice that about him as a character. He wasn't a perfect person, okay? Like, be a perfect person, all right? There you go. Okay, so I finished another book that I had started in August and was reading for myself, my own nonfiction reading challenge that I gave myself this year. Started in August, finally finished it, on Reading Well by Karen Swallow Prior. As you can see, I've got all kinds of tabs here, some fantastic quotes from the author. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. It was not what I expected, but it was good. So I expected it to be, I don't know, maybe I misunderstood the title in a way, or maybe the title is a little bit misleading, because I expected it to be more of like I knew that each chapter would be like about different classic books, like old classics and modern classics. And I thought that each chapter would be more of like a tribute to the book in question, or, you know, a brief analysis of major themes and ideas, big ideas in the book, that sort of thing, or a discussion about the value of the book. And it is, but it is all taken from a very particular perspective, which I feel like maybe different title would have reflected that perspective more. And the perspective, or the prism, or the, you know, the looking glass that she's examining this variety of books from, is that of virtue, the classic virtues. So like love, faith, hope, and love, for example, or humility was the chapter that I just finished. Prudence, temperance, justice, courage, those virtues, classic virtues of the Christian faith, but also taken from the classical understanding of those virtues from back, you know, as far as Plato and Aristotle, etc. in Western thought. What are the virtues of human life? And then also she has a very Christian perspective as well. She draws from the Bible as far as the meanings of the virtues and everything. When I previously mentioned this book, I was saying how I felt like sometimes the literary aspect was a little bit, suffered from a little bit of over-analysis, but actually I think it was the virtues themselves that I felt was being over-analyzed and dissected a little bit. Like most of these tabs are some fantastic thoughts of her own and from, you know, great thinkers of the past, from the Bible, from a scriptural perspective, about the different virtues, and very meaningful discussion on the virtues. But at the same time, sometimes just a little bit too, like, just overanalyzing, overthinking them. That's just what it felt like to me. Not all of them, some of them in particular just came across that way. I think those maybe were the ones that were a little bit difficult to explain. So you kind of have to dig really deep to explore and expound, you know, what that virtue really is and how it plays out in human life. But also there was a lot of like, sorry, I'm just sort of thinking out loud here a little bit, but I think I'm overthinking out loud here as I'm accusing other people of overthinking. But anyways, I think the problem is the Bible says that even our righteousness is as filthy rags, right? So even our virtues that we can display in our lives, they're never going to be perfectly lived out. We are never going to be perfectly courageous. Our courage will never be perfect. Our love will certainly never be perfect. Our humility is always going to be tainted by pride somewhere in there, because we are fallen human beings. And not until we are completely given incorruptible bodies in the future in heaven with God will we be able to actually exemplify these virtues in their perfection. So trying to illustrate these virtues through a story filled with flawed human people is going to be imperfect also. So I think that's what creates a little bit of this dichotomy, that, you know, you're describing a virtue, but then you keep bumping into the wall of the human condition of like, but wait, like, you know, we think that this is loving, but it's not really loving. Like, you know, such and such an act or behavior is loving, but actually it's not really loving because it's tainted by, you know, some kind of selfishness actually. So I think that's the problem. I think the problem is not in the book in itself, but in the very difficult concept of virtue and trying to understand it as it looks in the life of a person who is fallen. Obviously, Jesus is our perfect example of these virtues, which no one would deny. But the purpose of this book was to look at characters and stories and what they can teach us about virtue and how virtue is lived out fictionally as a means of helping us to understand how we can apply it in reality. So, very good book, excellent discussions on virtue. So many quotes that I need to write down because this is a library book. And overall, I really enjoyed it. I'm going to say 4.5 stars. Good book. So those are the books that I finished this week. And now for what I'm currently reading. This particular one definitely am not going to finish this weekend. Little Dorrit by Charles Dickens, which I'm reading for the Tea and Ink Society Challenge. Reading a Dickens novel was the prompt for September. And I had said in my September TBR video that I had never read Little Dorrit, but my Goodreads says otherwise. So yeah, I apparently have read Little Dorrit. So far, I'm 1 chapter in and not ringing any bells, but I sort of vaguely recall the character, possibly who is Little Dorrit. So I think as I get further into the story, I probably will start remembering some things, but in any case, obviously I did not read it very closely the first time. I'm reading it much more closely this time, and hopefully it will stick a little bit longer. I am loving, I just love Dickens' way with words and how he writes. This paragraph, for example, describing a prison. A prison taint was on everything there. The imprisoned air, the imprisoned light, the imprisoned damps, the imprisoned men were all deteriorated by confinement. As the captive men were faded and haggard, so the iron was rusty, the stone was slimy, the wood was rotten, the air was faint, the light was dim. Like a well, like a vault, like a tomb. The prison had no knowledge of the brightness outside, and would have kept its polluted atmosphere intact in one of the spice islands of the Indian Ocean. You could just feel like you're there, not that you would want to be in that environment. And the whole first chapter, he's contrasting, the name of the chapter is Sun and Shadow, and the whole way through he's contrasting both in the weather of the day that the story begins and the prison. He's contrasting the light and the darkness, and even the two characters who are in a cell together. There's one who obviously has some goodness in him, and the other one is obviously not a good man. And so he's comparing the light and the darkness there. So very interesting, off to a great start. And the other book I am reading, I started reading last night, A Heart Deceived, but I was so tired. I, again, got maybe a couple chapters in and I fell asleep, so I gave up. But I will get further in that tonight. And that one I may finish this weekend. We'll see how much time I have for reading. So that is my reading week, and I'm curious to see what you are all reading this week and what you've been enjoying, and anything else you want to tell me about these books I've read or the books you're reading, etc. And I will talk to you another time.